Welcome back, true crime fans. What you're about to hear is the story of a man whose first taste of grass felt like a crime. Marcus Walker had been a ghost for so long that when the steel door of the secure housing unit finally opened, the sound of the lock struck him like a gunshot. He had been buried in a 7 by 12-foot cell at Pelican Bay for 8 straight years. His days were measured by the clang of food slots, the shuffle of guards' boots, the muffled curses of men losing their minds down the tier. There were no windows, no sky, no accidental touches, only walls. The walk from his cell to the general population yard felt like a tunnel into another world. A guard with mirrored sunglasses led the way, saying nothing. The corridor stretched forever, gray concrete, fluorescent hum, the faint echo of distant voices. Marcus kept his eyes forward, every muscle taut with the reflexes of survival. In the SHU, looking sideways meant a challenge. Even a glance could end in blood. The yard door opened, and sound hit him like a wave. It was not the silence he knew, but a roaring human ocean. Voices, laughter, shouts, 1,000 conversations colliding. The air smelled of sweat, dirt, and faintly of grass. He squinted at the light. The California sun was hard and white after years of dimness. His eyes watered. He wiped them quickly before anyone could see. Weakness was still dangerous here. He scanned the yard the way a predator does, counting bodies, noting angles of escape, reading gestures. Basketball games at one end, weights clanging at another, men pacing like wolves. Everything about the general population was chaos compared to the regimented void of the SHU. But amid the noise, Marcus noticed something so small it almost broke him. A patch of lawn at the edge of the yard, damp and neglected, where the sprinklers had overshot the concrete. He thought of Jamala Taylor, the lifer who had survived the SHU before him, and spoke in hushed tones about his dream, to feel grass under his feet one more time. Marcus had never laughed at that dream. In the box, the idea of grass became mythic, a symbol of a world you could barely prove existed. Now, here it was, real, green, alive. He checked over his shoulder. No one was paying him attention. He slipped off his state-issue shoes, toes curling against the rough concrete. Then he stepped onto the grass. It was cool and wet, blades pressing between calloused toes. A smell rose up, earth, chlorophyll, something ancient. It was so simple, so alien, that it shocked the terror out of him. He bent his head, staring at his feet, trying to memorize the sensation before someone noticed. In that moment, he wasn't an inmate or a number or a predator. He was a man feeling the ground again. But freedom, even this tiny piece, carried its own danger. He pulled his shoes back on, heart hammering. The yard's noise rushed back in. He forced himself to walk toward a group of tables. He had to relearn how to be around people. He had to retrain his senses to accept closeness, touch, eye contact without flinching. The SHU had built walls inside him as solid as the ones he'd left behind. He sat at a table, plastic tray in front of him. The smell of institutional food rose up, powdered eggs, scorched toast. But he wasn't here for the meal. He was here to practice being human. Conversations swirled. Someone laughed. He made himself look up, meet a pair of eyes, nod. Nothing happened. The world didn't explode. Still, the ghosts of the SHU walked with him. Every sound felt like a threat. Every sudden movement made his pulse spike. He gripped his knees under the table, fighting the urge to flee. This was the real work now, dismantling the predator the box had built. Later that evening, back in his cell in general population, Marcus stared at his feet. Grass clung to the ridges of his skin like tiny green threads. He touched them with his finger, rubbed the smell into his hands. This was the first victory, a quiet reclamation of something he'd thought lost forever. He thought of Jamala Taylor's words and made himself a promise. Tomorrow he would do it again. Tomorrow he would stand barefoot longer. Tomorrow he would force himself to sit at the table again, to listen to conversations without bracing for attack. He would tear down the invisible walls one by one. And as he lay down on the thin mattress, the cacophony of the yard fading into memory, Marcus felt something dangerous and new. Not hope exactly, but the beginning of it. A sensation as fragile as grass under bare feet. He didn't know yet that his small act of defiance, taking off his shoes, feeling the earth, would set off a chain of events that someone had been watching. and that the past he'd tried to leave behind in the SHU was already moving toward him across the yard. Marcus started mapping his triggers like a detective charts a crime scene. Every panic attack, every moment of dread was a signpost pointing to a wound that needed to heal. He forced himself into the commissary again and again until the walls stopped closing in. He sat at more crowded tables in the chow hall. He tried to make small talk with strangers. Each effort felt like pushing against invisible chains. The prison's educational programs, a legacy of the hunger strikes, became his refuge. Marcus signed up for classes in psychology, sociology, and philosophy. Anything to understand his own mind and the system that had tried to break it. For the first time, he wasn't just an inmate, he was a student. He devoured books on trauma, community, and justice. He filled notebooks with ideas, questions, and fragments of memory. Leo encouraged him to write about his SHU years, to turn the pain into a map others could follow. Marcus began drafting an essay titled "The Sensation of Grass," about the first time he felt the earth under his feet after years of concrete. The act of writing was cathartic, but it also terrified him. Each sentence forced him to relive what he had locked away. The ghosts fought back. One night after a class, Marcus found himself standing in the yard under the security lights, hands trembling. He could swear he heard the echo of his old cell door slamming shut. For a moment, he was back in the SHU, airless and alone. He forced himself to breathe, to feel the grass again under his shoes, to remember where he was. Yet beneath the fear was something else, a glimmer of control. By naming the ghosts, he was starting to take their power. By learning, by writing, by reaching out to men like Leo, he was building a new self from the broken parts. But the SHU wasn't finished with him yet. In the corner of the yard, near the patch of grass, a man he didn't recognize had been watching him. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. The man nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before disappearing into the crowd. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. In prison, nothing happens without reason. He had spent months fighting to leave the predator behind, but predators have long memories. The day finally came when Marcus's number was called. He had served his time, completed his programs, weathered his ghosts. Now, standing at the gates of Pelican Bay with a paper bag of possessions and a heart pounding like a drum, he realized that every breath of outside air felt like stolen oxygen. The world beyond the fence was a blur of color and noise he barely recognized. A volunteer from a re-entry organization drove him toward the city. Marcus stared out the window like a man waking from a coma. The trees blurred into one another. Billboards shouted colors and promises. Cars honked. Even the sound of the tires on asphalt was intoxicating. At a stop on the way, the volunteer guided him into a Walmart. Marcus froze just inside the entrance. After years of state-issued rations, the place was an assault. Aisles of endless goods, shelves stacked to the ceiling, fluorescent lights buzzing like 1,000 hornets. He reached out to touch a row of shampoos and pulled his hand back. Too many choices felt like too many threats. He had to steady his breathing before walking another step. In the weeks that followed, Marcus learned to live like an alien dropped on Earth. He had to learn how to use a smartphone, how to navigate bus routes, how to pay with a card. He had to teach himself to look at crowds without scanning for weapons. Even a meal at a diner required effort. Sitting with his back to the room, practicing eye contact, forcing himself to listen to small talk instead of bracing for an attack. He found a job at a small nonprofit helping formerly incarcerated people. For the first time in his life, his experience was an asset, not a liability. He became the quiet man others came to for advice. When new arrivals fresh from the SHU sat trembling at a desk, Marcus would tell them about the grass. "Start small," he'd say. "Start with something living. It'll remind you you're alive." He rented a small house with a patch of backyard. The first thing he did was buy a bag of seeds and a trowel. Day after day, he dug in the soil, kneeling with bare hands in the dirt. He planted tomatoes, beans, herbs, anything that would grow. Each sprout was a quiet defiance of the concrete that had once defined him. It wasn't always easy. Nightmares still came. Crowds still made him flinch. Sometimes the sound of a slamming door sent him back to the SHU in an instant. But in the garden, he could breathe. He could feel the earth in his hands and remember that life could be cultivated, that something could grow from nothing. One afternoon, as he watered the rows, a neighbor asked what he was doing. Marcus smiled, a real, unforced smile, and said, "Building a future." The neighbor didn't know the whole story. They didn't need to. Marcus understood now that freedom wasn't the absence of walls. It was the presence of choice. The choice to speak or stay silent, to plant a seed or let the ground go bare, to reach out to another human being instead of pulling away. He knew he would never truly be free of the memories of the concrete box, but he had found a new definition of freedom, not escaping the past, but building a future one day, one moment, one handful of soil at a time. He bent down and pressed his palm flat to the earth, feeling the moisture seep into his skin. The blades of grass tickled his fingers. It was still a shock, still a miracle. And somewhere deep inside, the predator the SHU had built finally loosened its grip. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.